Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Meals To Unalive For, where we talk about a true crime case and I make a meal from scratch. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. So today's case was pretty crazy because I had never heard of them until recently, even though they murdered probably over 25 people. So we're talking about Leonard Lake and Charles Ng today. Leonard Lake was born October 29th, 1945 in San Francisco, California. He was the eldest of three children to Elgin and Gloria. They were divorced by the age of 6, and his mother ran after his father. From what I read, it said that he didn't want to go because he was afraid of living in poverty even then. So he went to live with his grandparents, and he would never go back to live with his actual parents ever again. Now, Leonard said that his grandparents were really good to him, which is unheard of because most of the time when I talk about these stories, there's a lot of abuse going on. And that just really wasn't the case in this case. He definitely had issues with his mother, but overall, it was a pretty decent childhood. Of course, he did exhibit some concerning behaviors. When he was younger, he had a mouse colony, and I guess he one day just decided to kill all of them and he dissolved them in chemicals. So that's a pretty big red flag. He also had a lot of disdain for his brother. So when his brother was 9, he was hit by a train, which caused brain damage and some mental delays. And this made Leonard resent him because his brother got most of his mother's attention. Therefore, it seemed like he developed a hatred for anyone who needed a little bit of extra help. So, anyone who had some mental delays or anyone on welfare, he specifically targeted. He specifically said he wished he could poison anyone on welfare, which is a pretty crazy statement considering the actions that he would do later on. So, it's not as if he was innocent or without struggle himself. January 27th, 1964, right after his 18th birthday, Leonard enlisted in the Marine Corps. Apparently, he did really well in military life, and he especially leaned into the survivalist part of it. After basic training, he would become a radar technician. During one of his leaves at a family gathering in North Carolina, he would meet his first wife, Karen Lee. They immediately hit it off and they would talk via mail, and sometime in 1969 they would marry during again one of his leaves. At first she said the marriage was normal, but then he became very controlling and would joke about selling her to some of his friends. She said that he would always brush her off and say that it was a joke, but she just knew it wasn't a joke. Karen said that he had a strange obsession with this one particular book as well that he had been reading since he was a teenager, and it was called The Collector by John Fowles. Basically, the premise of this book is it's this butterfly collector, and he goes on to hold a woman hostage, and she becomes his slave. And he insisted that Karen read this book, but this book will come up a couple times throughout this episode. So while all of this is going on, Leonard has actually done 2 tours in Vietnam. Leonard would lie a lot about the combat that he experienced while in Vietnam. And once again, he was a radar tech, so he really wasn't out in the field much. He was running the radar. So he would lie saying that he loved the combat and he loved the violence and that he killed a lot of people. So he fabricated a lot of stories. While in his second tour, Leonard convinced himself that his wife was cheating on him, so he went to get some mental help, and that's when he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was sent back to the States where he spent 2 months in a psych ward and he was discharged. After he was discharged, Karen and Leonard bought a house in San Jose, California, and Leonard became a mooch. He pressured Karen to be a stripper, and so she was paying for everything, and Leonard was just abusing her physically, mentally, and not doing anything. Also, while they were in this neighborhood, they would meet Charles Gunner, who he would become good friends with and would keep in contact with, but he'll come up later in the episode, so keep a pin in it. At one point, things reached a head where Leonard kicked Karen out of the house, so she finally filed for divorce. She said that he thought that she was cheating on him, and so he left all of her things outside. She felt that she had no choice. She went ahead and got an apartment, and she said even after that, even though he's the one that kicked her out, he stalked her for a while, but at least she did get away. One other thing that I feel like I should mention is that Leonard had a thing for taking pictures of women. So he would harass women constantly, like, let me take lewd photos of you, like, let me take, nice photographs. And he would pose as a photographer just to get women more comfortable, thinking that he was a professional. And Karen had said that he also took her photos on numerous occasions. After the divorce, Leonard kind of drifts along for a while, and at some point he moves in with a woman named Venus at her property in Ukiah. I guess they started talking about homesteading and off the grid techniques, and they hit it off. So she offered for him to come stay with her to help build out her cabin and fix it up, and eventually it developed into a relationship. Something to mention about this property is it wasn't quite like a compound, but the best way that I can describe it is it was like a hippie HOA. So if you lived on this property or this community, I should say, you agreed to certain bylaws. So there was like a strict no guns law. There was a law about clearing trees, basically, like just very, very strict laws when it came to the environment and how they felt about things. Oh, also, nudity was acceptable. So it was almost like, a nudist compound too. So the relationship really wouldn't last long, and I guess Venus just wanted out, so she actually sold her shares because it wasn't like property ownership, it was like you had to purchase shares to be part of this community. So she sold her shares to Leonard, so she left and he stayed on the property, but the relationship with his neighbors also soured because again, he didn't adhere to a lot of the bylaws, he owned a lot of guns, he would clear things, he was just doing whatever the heck he wanted and not following these laws that they had put in place. Not only that, but the community also noticed that he was really creepy around a lot of the women. Again, he was harassing women for photographs and trying to get them to come over and saying that he was a professional. So he gave a lot of the women in the community the creeps. One girl he took advantage of was Darlene Davis, who was one of his neighbors. She was 13 when they met, and he immediately started grooming her. And they would have, I don't want to say necessarily a relationship, but he was definitely grooming her for a couple years before her parents started to catch on. And they sent her to boarding school to get them away from each other because they suspected something was up. In 1975, Leonard would go on to meet his second wife, Carolyn Balaz, aka Cricket, and that's how he and most other people refer to her as, so I'm just going to call her Cricket for the rest of this episode. Cricket would move in with him, but it didn't last long because Leonard was arrested for stealing at his job, so he was actually asked to leave the community, and I guess people can like vote you out, so he lost that property. Leonard and Cricket would leave and become caretakers of a Philo motel. And it was here that Leonard would meet Charles Ng while he stayed at the hotel in hiding from the Marines. Charles Ng was born December 24th, 1960, in Hong Kong, and he was the youngest of three children and the only boy. And his father was a self made man. He crawled out of poverty and really wanted better for his children. So he sent all of his children to the top schools. But unfortunately, Charles didn't seem to want to get with the program. He was expelled several times from different schools and eventually, his father decided to send him to North Yorkshire, England, to get a better education at a boarding school. But again, he was expelled for stealing. So after that, he was sent to the College of Notre Dame in Belmont, California in 1978. But again, that didn't last very long. He dropped out after one semester. Soon after this, he was involved in a hit and run accident, and to avoid prosecution, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. So at this point in time, because Ng technically wasn't a US citizen, he shouldn't have been able to join the Marine Corps, but he said that his recruiting sergeant falsified documents attesting to his birthplace as Bloomington, Indiana. So I guess they just smuggled him into the Marines. It was said that Charles was basically a loner the entire time that he was in the Marines. He was only friendly to people that he said that he felt he could manipulate or use later. And he really just kept to himself and practiced a lot of his martial arts. Less than a year into his service, Charles decided that he was going to break into the armory and steal firearms and sell them from the military, and he got caught. So he was court-martialed, but he escaped custody in 1980 and made his way back to Northern California, where he met Leonard Lake at the Philo Motel. The three were pretty much inseparable as soon as they got together, and they moved out to a mobile home in Ukiah. And in 1982, federal authorities would raid the home, seizing a large stash of illegal weapons and explosive. Lake was released on bond, but he jumped bail and hid at a remote cabin owned by his wife, Cricket, in Wilseyville. And Ng was captured and returned to Marine custody and pleaded guilty to charges of theft and desertion. Under the terms of this plea, he was paroled and dishonorably discharged in 1984 after serving 18 months in the military stockade at the disciplinary barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So I guess Leonard Lake was terrified of serving time in jail or prison for an extended amount of time because he decided that he was going to go on the run, like I said. And he even carried around pills of cyanide because he said if he was ever going to go away for a long time, he would rather kill himself than serve time. And after he became a fugitive, Cricket decided to leave Leonard because she didn't want to be on the run forever, but they remained a close relationship. While they were eventually divorced, like they really didn't stop seeing each other. While Charles Ng was in prison, though, Leonard Lake was busy. So one day he just showed up at his mother's home saying that he wanted to make amends with his brother Donald. So he took him on a road trip and no one ever saw him again. Their mother would report Donald missing, and Leonard would start cashing his disability checks. And later, he'd forge a letter to his mother saying that he was fine and living in Reno, Nevada. So it's funny that, once again, he hated people who were disabled or on welfare when he's casting these checks that don't belong to him. So after all of this, Leonard decides to move in with Charles Gunner in Morgan Hill, California. So remember, this was the neighbor that he became close with during his first marriage with Karen. Now, after moving in, he wrote in his journal that he hated seeing how Gunner abused his daughters, which is odd because he did some pretty awful things, but he really condemned Charles Gunner for how he treated his children, which is really hypocritical. Leonard would come up with what he called Operation Fish, which was basically just him killing Charles Gunner. And there were two occasions before he was successful where it just didn't work. Either he wouldn't go on a road trip with him or it just fell through. But eventually, Gunner would go on a road trip with him and said that he just ran off, according to Leonard, with another woman, and he would steal Gunner's identity and would take care of his children, which again was very strange considering he was such a creep to other women. But these children he supposedly took very good care of. He took them to the water park, he took them to go clothes shopping. By all accounts, he took good care of the children while they were in his care, before he placed them with a family friend who was willing to take on the responsibility. After he placed the children, he would relocate again to Wilseyville, California, where Cricket owned that cabin. So he went back there and he would start building his doomsday bunker and his cell for later. On top of being a complete nut when it came to taking pictures of women and the obsession with keeping a slave, quote unquote, like his book in The Collector, he also felt like the world was going to end or there was like an apocalypse situation. So like I said, he really leaned into this survivalist thing. He wanted a doomsday bunker because he was worried that something was going to happen one day. And it's about now that Charles Ng would be released from prison and he would rejoin Leonard in Wilseyville. And since their bunker was pretty much complete, they decide to go rent an apartment in San Francisco. The whole point in the 2 men going to San Francisco was for Operation Miranda, is what Leonard referred to it, and this was essentially him staking out what he was looking for in a "slave," quote, unquote. So he was looking for potential women that he could bring back to the cabin and keep forever. Once the men are in San Francisco, that seems to be when they really start upping the violence and the amount of lives that they start taking, not even for pleasure, but also for personal gain. On July 11th, 1984, Donald Galletti, 36, a radio personality from San Francisco, California, was spending time in his apartment expecting a visitor. Galletti was openly gay and lived with a man named Richard Carrazza. Galletti placed a personal advertisement in the newspaper offering to give sexual favors to straight men. That night, a stranger knocked on the door. When Galletti opened the door, a man pistol whipped him and shot him in the head at close range. Carrazza was also immediately shot in the chest. The man fled, and Carrazza called the police. Carrazza did survive and was the only known victim of the 2 men to have survived. Carrazza would later identify Ng as the main shooter, and I'm honestly not sure what was the motive exactly. I think they were trying to rob Galletti and weren't expecting a second person, so they panicked. But yeah, that was pretty wild. The saddest part is that neither of the men were suspects in most of the killings and murders that they did. So we'll come back to some of the victims that they had. But eventually they would be caught on June 2nd, 1985. Blake and Ng entered the South City Lumber store in South San Francisco. An employee observed Ng stealing a $75 vise, which it's one of those metal things in, like a shop where you put it on the edge of the table and it like holds things still while you're working on something. So he was stealing one of those. They called the police, and when they were confronted, Ng tossed the vise into the trunk of the 1980 Honda Pruitt in the parking lot, then fled on foot. Police arrived in minutes and they started looking in the car's trunk. They saw the stolen vise along with a 22 caliber pistol along with an illegal silencer. Blake asserted that there was a misunderstanding and that he would be more than happy to pay for the vise, but he was arrested for the possession of all the illegally modified weapons in the car. And after the arrest, the officers noticed that Lake bore no resemblance to the photo on his driver's license, which had the name Robin Scott Stapley. We'll get to that. And the Honda was registered to a Paul Cosner who disappeared on November 2nd, 1984. And the car's license plate was another missing person, Lonnie Bond. So nothing was adding up. Everything was from different people. So he was pretty much immediately taken into custody. As soon as they got into the precinct, he pretty much immediately admitted his real identity and that of Charles Ng's identity. He asked for a minute so he could write a note to his ex-wife Cricket and for a glass of water, and while he was in the interrogation room alone, he had taken out the cyanide pills that he kept on his person and he swallowed them. And even though he was rushed to a nearby hospital, he went into a coma for 4 days and was pronounced dead on June 6th. So unfortunately, he faced no repercussions for what he did to all of those women and people. So he just basically got away with it. So police started digging deeper because obviously nothing is matching Leonard's identity. Everything is from missing people. So they call up Cricket Balaz and ask if they can search the cabin. So that's when things really start getting more intense. So Cricket decides that she'll meet with them and let them kind of look around the cabin. And again, they don't have a search warrant yet. This is just, hey, can we come look around? And she nonchalantly says that, she had come the night before to clean up. And Leonard's mother corroborated this, saying that they cleaned up for anything embarrassing, quote unquote, which I thought was very suspicious. But as soon as they start looking around the cabin, they start noticing items that were belonging to the missing people that they knew did not belong to Leonard, like some filming equipment, and the serial number matched what was stolen from some of these missing people as well. So they were able to get a search warrant. So some of the people that they found items from were Harvey and Deborah Dubbs and their 1-year-old son, Sean Dubbs. They went missing July 25th, 1984 from their San Francisco home. On the night that they disappeared, Deborah was speaking on the telephone to a friend when the doorbell rang in their apartment. Deborah told her friend that she had to end the conversation as the two men had arrived, and I guess they were trying to sell some of Harvey's video equipment, and that's why someone was there trying to buy the equipment, but they were never found again. But this was how police knew that they were linked because they had Harvey's video equipment in the cabin. So after police come back with the search warrant, that's where they really start digging around. And in the shop that Leonard had, that was the bunker, they realize that there is a secret door. So they gain entry and realize very quickly that this was a makeshift cell, and it didn't leave a lot to the imagination for what it was used for. There was a board on one of the walls that had rules written down for whoever was being held in the cell.
I want to be able to use a woman whenever and however I want. And when I'm tired or satiated or bored or not interested, I simply want to put her away, lock her up in a little room, get her out of my sight, out of my life, and thus avoid what heretofore has always been the obligation to entertain or amuse or satisfy a particular woman or girlfriend's whims of emotional whatevers. Such an arrangement, of course, is not only blatantly sexist, but highly illegal, there's no doubt about it. It violates all of the human rights and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to spare posterity my concepts of other people's morality. I'm explaining my morality, what I feel, what I want. And as of this moment, I'm going to try to get it. I can create a facility that is so stark and so empty, so cold, so quiet, so totally removed from the world, that fairly quickly, by a combination of painful punishments when I'm displeased and minor rewards such as music or magazines or some such stuff, that I can quickly condition, this is my belief, that I can quickly condition a young woman to cooperate with me fully, and in fact even look forward to cooperating with me fully, simply if for no other reason than such cooperation would be a relief from boredom.
These rules on the cell said, and I quote, "I must always be ready to serve my master. I must be clean, brushed, and made up with my cell neat. I must never speak unless spoken to, Unless in bed, I must never look my master in the eye. I would keep my gaze downcast. I must never show my disrespect. I must never cross my arms or legs in front of my body or clench my fists. Unless eating, I must keep my lips parted. I must be obedient completely in all things. I must obey immediately without question or comment. I must always be quiet when locked in my cell. I must remember and obey any additional rules told to me. Anything unpleasant to my master is grounds for punishment. So clearly, it was a literal hell in that cell. And if that wasn't enough, they also uncovered tapes of what had been going on. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. As you can see by some of the clips that I have posted in here, Lake really liked to document his feelings and his thoughts, and that didn't stop with just him. And he kind of kept the theme of he liked to take pictures of women, so he evolved into taking videos of his victims as well. So police keep digging and they keep looking around, and eventually, they find a makeshift burial site nearby, and the police unearth 45 pounds of burned and crushed human bone fragments, corresponding to a minimum of 11 bodies. But they found more later on as well throughout the decades after people bought the property and started developing it. So, this was not the end, this was just the beginning. So one of the people that they found would be Reginald or Reggie Frisbee. He was 29 when he was murdered, and he was actually never reported missing. And it's unclear how he met Lake and Ing, but his remains were found on June 7th, 1985 by police. And they didn't identify him until actually earlier this year in January of 2025 using investigative genetic genealogy. So we're not even sure how he died or what the story was on that at all. Some other victims that they found would be Jeffrey Dean Ashrin and Maurice Anthony Rock, Randy Vern Jacobson, and it was assumed that all the men that they killed was strictly for financial reasons because they would steal their identities and any benefits from the government that they would receive or their vehicles. So it was all financial when it came to the men. Another example of this would be with Paul Stephen Cosner. He was 39 when he went missing November 2nd, 1984. He was selling his 1980 Honda Prelude and he told his girlfriend, I'm going to go meet with this buyer and sell this car, and then I'll see you later at the house. And he never showed up again, and the car was also gone. So we're pretty sure that Ing and Lake met up with him under the guise of buying this car, and then they killed him and took him and the car. It's also really sad because they found personal belongings that belonged to certain people, but they didn't find their remains. That was the case for Sherilyn Okoro. She disappeared from San Francisco in a rooming house where another victim also lived, and they found photographs and personal belongings and an 11-page letter by her, but her remains were never found. It seemed like they had mastered the art of luring people out, and this was the case for Michael Sean Carroll and his girlfriend Kathleen Elizabeth Allen. So Michael and Ing had served together in Fort Leavenworth, and we're not even quite sure how Ing got Michael alone, but he did. And of course, when he didn't return back to the couple's motel room and had been a couple days, Kathleen started to get worried. They left a note, which was really from Ing and Lake, saying that he had to leave and that he was in Lake Tahoe and to join him and he'll send a car, which happened to be Lake who picked her up. And of course, she never made it out. She would make appearances in some of the tapes that Ing and Leonard made. So we know that she died there and her remains were also found on the property. The duo would take on another family, which was Lonnie Waybond Sr., who was 27, his girlfriend, Brenda Sue O'Connor, 20, and their son, Lonnie Waybond Jr., only 1 years old, along with their family friend, Robin Scott Stapley. And if you remember, Leonard Lake actually had Stapley's ID when he was arrested. So there was some ties there already. And they went missing from Wiselyville, and they were one of their neighbors. I guess Lonnie had threatened Leonard because he was being a creep towards Brenda, trying to get her to take pictures and, just being gross and a pervert in general. And I guess Lonnie had visited a family friend and said that he was going to go after Leonard. And obviously that didn't go well because his family was never seen again. So we don't know the details of everything that had happened, but we know that there were problems arising even before they were murdered. So Brenda would end up being one of the women in these tapes, and it was just heartbreaking. There's a point where Ing goes and cuts off part of Brenda's shirt and says, quote, "You can cry and stuff like the rest of them, but it won't do any good. We are pretty cold-hearted, so to speak," end quote. In another part of the video, Brenda is desperately asking where her son is because remember, he's still just a baby. And they tell her that she's never going to see him again and that she's a bad mother, which honestly, it really, really hurt my soul to listen to. So they tell her that they gave her baby away to a couple in Fresno who needed a son. One thing that I think is really crazy is that out of all the bodies that they found on the property, they never found Sean Dubs and they never found Lonnie Bond. So both of these little babies were around 1, and the team of anthropologists were dreading finding these kids. They never found them. They are considered victims of the duo, but I just wonder, were they telling the truth when they said that they gave their children away to somebody else? Like, are they out there? I obviously have no proof of that. It's just interesting that they were never found. I do hope that they're living a good life if they are alive. So I know you must be wondering at this point what happened to Charles Ng. So if you remember when Leonard was arrested, Charles went on the run on foot and he called Cricket and she came and got him and they kind of scoped the place out. So she picks him up and then she drops him off at his aunt's and she knows what's going on, by the way. She's not innocent to any of this, which we'll talk about a little bit later. He goes to his aunt's, and then his aunt drops him off at the San Francisco International Airport, and he flies out to Chicago, and from there, he goes into Canada to escape authorities. After he gets into Canada, he's eventually busted for shoplifting, where he's arrested and questioned because obviously he's a wanted man from the US, and it takes a long time to get him extradited, but they do. While he was in prison, though, he tries to make a hit list because he doesn't want to be extradited. He's afraid of the death penalty and he doesn't want to be sent back to the States. So he acts out a lot trying to stay in Canada so that they'll charge him with more things so that he's stuck there, but it doesn't work. Even when he gets back and they start the trial, he does everything that he possibly can to delay things. He hires and fires new attorneys. He tries to represent himself. It's just ongoing, and it actually costs the state over 20 million to hold this sentencing. Leonard's second ex-wife, Clara Lynn Balaz, also known as Cricket, was given immunity in exchange for her testimony against Charles Ng. Personally, this really upset me because I don't feel like they needed her testimony. I mean, there was film evidence, the bodies were there, everything was stacking up against them. So personally, I think she should have done time. Let me explain why. One, she helped Charles Ng escape. She knew what was going on and chose to help him flee. Two, it was her property, so I have a feeling that she knew what was going on anyway. And three, Leonard's journals depicted that she knew what he was planning on doing since 1980, that he was eventually planning on kidnapping some poor woman and holding them hostage. So you can't tell me that she didn't know about it. I think she just let it happen and didn't ask too many questions. So I personally feel like she was not innocent and should have also been charged. I did look to see if I could find her, but said that she had changed her name and was living underneath a different alias, which, I mean, smart on her part, but I just don't think that she's a good person, and honestly, like, I hope that she had a miserable life. Charles Ng, on the other hand, would be sentenced to death in February 1999, and he's currently serving his sentence in California State Prison in Vacaville on death row. So I'm not sure that he'll ever be put to death. He's still there and alive, but honestly, I hope he's also having a horrible time after what he did to those poor people. For this meal, I decided to go ahead and make some lemon and dill trout and some crispy potatoes and some sautéed green beans with a berry crisp. So all of it was very fresh. It made me think of the mountains here. So that's kind of what I went with today. Still pretty good, just more on the simple end. Anyway, guys, if you liked this episode, please give me a like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.